You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. The futures markets can be downright scary. Limit up, limit down. What the heck is RBOB anyway? Are they going to dump a truckload of soybeans on your front lawn if you click the wrong button? Come to think of it, maybe you should just stick to your comfort zone. Or you can break out of it with the Futures Rundown. The Futures Rundown is here to help you make sense of these scary markets. We'll analyze all the top futures trading activity, explore the ins and outs of your favorite products, explain exactly how futures work, and hear from leading experts in the futures markets. We'll even tackle all of your wildest futures trading questions. If it involves futures, then you'll hear about it on the Futures Rundown. The Futures Rundown is brought to you by T4 Futures and Options. Elevate your trading experience with the T4 Futures and Options trading platform. Whether you prefer desktop or mobile applications, T4 delivers low latency and professional-grade functionality for both traders and brokers. Take advantage of theoretical sheets, strategy solver, MBO, advanced charts, and a suite of powerful features to enhance your trading strategy. Visit ctsfutures.com or search for T4 Futures and Options on Google to register and get a free month. And now, it's time to break into the futures markets. It's time for the Futures Rundown.
All right, everybody. It's great to hear that music here on the network for the second time. Yes, the second episode of the Futures Rundown coming at you. And you know what? If you liked the little taste you got last week with the inaugural episode, you're going to love it this week because you're getting two back-to-back, a doubleheader, right out of the gate, shotgunning you. 2 episodes of the Futures Rundown. Of course, our pro folks will be getting both in their ear holes back-to-back. Everyone else will be getting episode 3 next week at its same bat time, same bat channel. I will be traveling down to Florida for the Securities Traders Association annual conference to see what's going on down there in the world of securities and options and the intersection therein. Of course, if you like what you hear, make sure you leave a rating or review on whatever platform. Again, this is a brand new show, listeners, so I just went out to all the feeds for the first time last week. Of course, it's in our network feed, which you should all be listening to. If you're subscribed to that, you already got it. So congratulations, you passed the test. But if you like what you hear, throw a rating, a star, or a comment. Again, it's brand new. So all the new comments and stars and ratings and feedback does help at the end of the day. And joining me for our second guest host spot, we couldn't talk futures without bringing on our old pal, the one, the only, Dan the Man Gramza from Gramza Capital Management. Dan, welcome to your first ever foray on the Futures Rundown, sir.
Well, I'm honored to be here. It's exciting to see this new show with an emphasis on futures. Well overdue, and I'm glad you're doing it.
You know, Dan, I resisted for years, and they kept trying to pull me in, saying, when are you going to do a show about futures? When are you going to do a show about futures? And I resisted, I hemmed and hawed, and finally this year, sir, the drumbeat became too persistent. I could resist no more. The folks at Plus 500 pulled me to the dark side, Dan. And I'm glad they did, because it's been a fun foray into the world of futures. Speaking of forays, Dan, I know you've been in the futures business forever, so most 99.9% of the people listening to this show are going to know the sound of your voice. They probably heard you already on Twifo, but this is a new show. It's going out to new reaches, new listeners at the end of the day. So really quickly at the top of the show, give our newer friends a little overview of who the heck is Dan Gramza?
Well, I started with stock options, actually. And my plan was to go to the floor to become a market maker. And First Stops was the firm that I was going to use to do that. And as I went through that, one of the things I noticed about options is that it starts out by saying, books start out by saying, if you think it's going up, down, sideways, here are the strategies that you do, which I thought was very interesting. But it seemed to me the idea of direction became an important parameter. And as an option market maker, if that's the direction you were going, well, you don't really worry about price, you worry about the Greeks. So you can manage a position without thinking much about price. But those guys across the street at the Board of Trade, they did look at price, and they did look at these charts and things like that. Well, that I thought was important. So I had a little Chicago rice and cotton seat at that exchange to get floor access, to give me that point of view of the dynamics of a market. And that revealed for me the hidden information I was looking for. And so the result of that is I really went upstairs, which is really where I wanted to go. And the reason behind that is if you were trading in the bond pit, you're not going to trade soybeans. You're not going to be looking at crude oil. You're not going to look at gold. You got to focus on that pit where you are. Nothing wrong with that. It's just part of the life of a market maker. I wasn't interested in that. What I was interested in is trading IBM options to that gold, copper, whatever it may be. So my interest was being upstairs. And today, with the technology that we have available, being on the floor isn't really critical at all. In fact, there is no floor in most markets. But it's not essential. You and I have a lot of information that we can use. And I was asked by the CME group to teach a class on market profile for floor traders. I did that, and it was going well. And they said, could we open up to the public? I said, sure. A couple of traders from RBC came down and took the class. They're doing better. Boss says, what are you doing? Learned it from a guy in Chicago. And they invited me up to Toronto. And for 7 years, I taught new hires at RBC. And as you know, Mark, and in any business, everybody knows everybody. And they told somebody in London who was looking for someone to teach technical analysis. And then they told somebody in Helsinki and then Stockholm, and over 36 countries later and over 450 institutions I've dealt with, over 36 different exchanges, I would have a chance to circle the globe. And before COVID, I would travel about 200,000 miles a year. And it was working primarily with institutional traders on technical approaches as well as technical trading strategies. And what I found over time is that there are little twists that we can do to technical approaches that can fine-tune it to what someone's trading objectives are, or what I found helpful for me. And so it's been a wonderful opportunity to visit a lot of different cultures, eat a lot of different food, and also look at markets in different parts of the world. And some of it involved the trading aspect, some involved the evolution of going from equity to trading. I worked with the Buenos Aires Stock Exchange because they wanted to start trading futures. Same thing in Peru. The Cyprus Stock Exchange, I was involved with the State Department to help establish that exchange. I worked with SGX in Singapore to get their floor members ready for trading off the screen, and 85% of those traders are still involved in the business. It's been an exciting journey, and I really enjoy visiting these markets. I've never bored in that regard. So through a word of mouth network, my life has taken me through those different parts of the world. And what's interesting to me, Mark, is how, and I'm talking about institutionally, again, that's primarily who I see, although I do see private traders at conferences in different parts of the world. Now I'll be speaking down in Florida, actually, in a few months. But on the institutional side, what's interesting is how institutions look at risk and how they deal with it, whether they're using the underlying instrument or whether they're using options to wrap around and protect a position. But it's also the overall attitude towards risk. Like if you look at Chinese traders, for example, in China, Taiwan, they have a tendency to be more aggressive. They're comfortable with the concept of risk. If you look at some of the former Eastern Bloc countries, they also have an aggressive attitude towards risk. They want a piece of the pie. But if you look at Europe, if you look at United States, Canada, Australia, they have a tendency to be conservative. They're trying to protect their piece of pie. And you see it in the attitudes of how institutions will position themselves. Like today, with the CPI coming out, you'll see Europe going neutral as it goes into the number, for example. So it's a wonderful opportunity I've been blessed with. And so anyways, that's a little bit about what I do.
A brief overview of the life and times of Dan Gramza. But Dan, I think you bring up an important point. It's an unheralded aspect of the futures market, the delicious food. You get to sample so many different types of food from around the world. So there you go, Dan.
Yeah, you're right.
People don't talk about that enough when they're talking about slinging futures. Speaking of slinging futures, let's get to it, listeners. A little bit of the old trading pit.
It's time to break down all the action that's lighting up the futures markets this week. What's limit up and what's crashing and burning? Let's find out. It's time to enter the trading pit.
All right, welcome to the Trading Pit, the portion of the show where we break down some of the activity that caught our eye in the futures market since our last episode. And Dan, you make a good point at the top of the show there. The term trading pit, a bit of an anachronism. It doesn't really exist anymore. So that's why we have to do it, Dan. We're keeping the trading pit spirit alive because you're looking for futures trading pits. They are somewhat few and far between now these days, Dan.
They are. That's very true. But we have a trading pit. It's just a global trading pit. We're no longer restricted in terms of the need to be on the floor. When I first started, that's where you needed to be to see current information. And now we have this global audience that can trade these markets, which is really exciting. And I think you're still very accurate by calling this the trading pit, just a big pit.
So the whole world is our pit now. The world is our oyster. Mr.
Correct.
Dan. Let's see what's going on in that oyster. Is it a shiny pearl this week, listeners, or is it just a rotten, toxic thing that's going to kill you the second you eat it? Last week, it was looking a little dire out there. Coming into this week, kind of a little bit more of a mixed bag as we look back on some of the major markets from the past 7 days. We've got upside, we've got downside to spare. In fact, it's kind of a split market. Coming into today, it seemed like, at least on the equity side, we were going to be taking a nice drubbing again to the downside. It doesn't seem like the worm has turned. Now we have equities at least are rallying hard and vol coming crashing back to earth. So another one of those days where if you don't like where the markets are, where the underlyings are, listeners, just wait 5 minutes because things are going to be moving. We'll break down some of the most actives that we saw from yesterday's paper coming into today in a second to give you a fun snapshot, give you a sense of what's really trading out there in the futures market right now. But looking back over the past week, we've got a few standouts. We're talking green this week, then we're looking at nat gas up not quite 15%, but close to about 14.7% from last week to this week here. So a bit of a banger move. Now, if you know anything about nat gas, that is not out of the realm of possibility. Nat gas, a pretty lower price contract at the end of the day, sub $3. So larger percentage moves are not out of the ordinary for nat gas. Oats, I'm looking forward, Dan, to talking about oats here on this show, up nearly 6% this week. You know, we always touch on oats and TWIFO because, as we can see, the underlying moves, but the options trade 3 contracts a week, so I can never sink my teeth into them, pun intended. But you know what? The futures do a little bit more than that. So we might have a chance to talk about oats. What do you think, Dan?
Sure.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to that as a possibility here on the old futures rundown. Below that, we have a little bit of metals. Hope you like some P metals, listeners, because we have palladium and platinum both lighting it up this week as well, up about 4% or close to that, a little more. And then, of course, winding it down, we got our old pal Class 3 milk, so dairy. We're going to joke a little bit about dairy in a little bit. To the downside, we have livestock taking it on the chin. So as much as nat gas was up, lean hogs are pretty much down, right around 14% this week. And then oil, we'll get to this in a second as well. This has been a big story in the futures world. Of course, WTI continuing to take a beating, off about 7%. And then we've got pretty much a swath of energy, heating oil, and RBOB. What the heck is RBOB anyway, says our guy in the intro. I think we have to do an RBOB contract specs segment soon. But RBOB off about 5%. And then we have heating oil off about 6.5%. And not to be outdone, a little bit of equity action as well. We had the Russell 2000 off a little over 3, about 3.1%. So an intriguing week. Dan, a lot of activity going on out there this week. What's really catching your eye from a futures and underlying movement perspective this week, sir?
Well, you know, we have a whole variety of markets that each one has their own unique story in that regard. You mentioned equities. I think they have a very interesting setup after CPI and after the debate last night. We've got PPI coming out, and we have labor numbers coming out, payroll numbers coming out on Friday. So we still have a lot of fundamentals that can stimulate those markets. So I think they're logical in terms of what we're seeing. How we're finishing today out could be very interesting. The currencies are also another complex that I think have a mixed bag in terms of the strength or weakness of the dollar. If we look at interest rate markets, they're also, I think, a little surprising for people. And again, they're anticipating what the Fed's going to be doing here shortly with interest rates. Metals also, you know, from copper to silver and gold are you showing us some unique opportunities, I think, but I don't think there's the fundamentals there. Energy, boy, you mentioned nat gas. That's one that's really timely, Mark, because of the fundamentals behind that and the weather conditions we're being faced with. And also, Francine, this tropical storm, the cyclone, the impact it has and why it has an impact on nat gas. So that's a very interesting markets. And I think the eggs also have their own story to tell. But, you know, a lot of these things may seem random, but markets respond to perception and the outlook for the future. That's what we're seeing here. What is the attitude as we look towards the future? So we have a lot to take a peek at if we have some time.
Yeah, let's get into it. Let's go really quickly right now. I want to, and I think we're going to table the crude oil because I think we have a listener question about that for our next episode, Dan, so we could sink our teeth into crude oil a little bit more deeply on the next episode. Really quickly, looking at some of the other surprises we have going on out here, just on yesterday's markets, give you a little bit more near-dated action. You can obviously look at surprises and look at market moves a lot of different ways. You can look at percentage moves. You can look at how much they move compared to their standard deviation. Let's go that way right now. We have orange juice popping hard yesterday, up almost over 1 standard deviation, about 1.1. So a hard move out there in November OJ, and palladium, December palladium, up about 3/4 of a standard deviation. And then lithium, why not? Up 0.6 in terms of a standard deviation. So interesting surprises to the upside yesterday. Downside, again, this is just from Tuesday, listeners, coming into today's show. Ethanol off over 2, about 2.25 standard deviations in the October contract. So come in for ethanol And then the Bloom Commodity Index off 1.25 standard deviations as well. And then sugar taking on the chin off a full standard deviation yesterday as well. So a lot of action yesterday coming into today's show. Speaking of action, let me break it down now, Dan. Usually we'll do, top 5, top 10 most actives. I'm going to expand that today to do a quick top 20 because I know you have a lot of listeners out there who are newer to futures, and I want to give them a good sense of how these things are trading, what's really trading on a given day. So this is all pulled from yesterday, which was a decently active day. These are the top 20 most active futures markets. We're going to go by month so you can really see it in a more granular fashion as opposed to, let's say, all of the 10-year treasury complex added together. We're going to go by months so you can see exactly what's lighting it up. All right, number 20 listeners. We're going out to the ags first. Soybean meal, the Dees contract, 76,000 of those on the tape yesterday coming in at number 20. Number 19, off to the realm of FX. South of the border, it's the Mexican peso, near dated this time, the September contract, 105, almost 106,000 of those. Number 18, going north of the border now, keeping it in the FX. It's the dollar loonie. Before it was dollar peso, now it's dollar loonie, also near dated, the September contract. A lot of action in FX these days, 107,000 of those, so neck and neck with the peso USD. Number 17, back to the ags, it's soybeans, the Nove contract this time, so keeping true to ags, they're usually a little bit longer term, 120,000 of those on the tape. Number 17. Number 16, keeping it in the ags, longer term again, it's December corn, 120,000 of those bad boys on the tape as well. 15, back to FX, it's the USD Aussie dollar September contract, 121,000 of those on the tape. Number 14, the Dow Futures Mini, 14, 137,000 of those bad boys on the tape out there. Number 13, pound USD, back to FX, September contract, 140,000 of those. Number 12, our old pal, the Russell 2000, SEP contract, so near dated yet again, 144,000 on the tape. Number 11, going to Nat Gas, going out to October in Nat Gas, 169, almost 170,000 of those. Number 10, back to FX, it's the yen. You may have heard of the yen recently. Yen USD, a hot trade, September contract, 190,000 of those futures going up. Again, this is just yesterday, listeners. Number 9, keeping it in FX, my goodness. Euro USD, September contract, 321,000 contracts on the tape yesterday. Now we're getting even more contracts you may know and love, listeners. Number 8 is the crude oil WTI October contract, 414,000 contracts. Number 7, it's NASDAQ. The NASDAQ E-mini September contract, 532,000 contracts. Number 6, it's the 2-year note going out to December, 723,000 contracts. Number 5, now here's where we get a little playing with the numbers. It's the S&P 500, not the E-mini. That's coming later. It's the micro September contract, 1.1 million. So take that one with a bit of a grain of salt. After all, it is a smaller, more bite-sized contract. Number 4, 5-year T-note, Dees contract, 1.2 million contracts. Number 3 is the NASDAQ 100. Again, this is a micro as well, so we should put a little air quotes around this one as well. September contract, 1.45 million. Then we get to the big dog, the S&P E-mini number 2, September contract, almost 1.5 million contracts just for the September future listen, 1.48. And then the top of the list, Dees 10-year, 1.82 million contracts on the tape. Dan, any surprises there? And we got about 5 minutes left in the show. Man, time's flying this week. Anything else you want to dive deep into for this week's action?
Well, you picked a lot of them there that were really interesting.
It's a big rundown, sir.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned we'll look at energy a little bit later on. Right now, you could pick any of those really that give us an idea of volatility and what's happening in these markets. What's interesting about futures is you can see those percentage moves or larger moves in these contracts. And usually when you see that, though, you want to look at where is it? Is it cheap? Is it expensive? For example, nat gas, that's cheap right now. Is it fairly priced? And one of the ways you can get those answers is to look at that longer term chart. Are we above the highs we've had for the last few years? Are we below those highs? Are there fundamental drivers that are going to keep these prices low? Or do we look for a position where the fundamentals are now supporting a change and a shift? So I guess from my point of view, and it doesn't have to be complicated, by the way, futures are not necessarily complicated to trade. You just want to think about What is it that's behind the market you're looking at? And again, what is your point of view for your strategy that you're going to use with those markets?
Dan, we had a little fun on the show. I was with your pal Carly Garner was on the show, and we were talking about some other things that were surprising to the upside, including cash settled cheese last week. Not a product that's usually on our radar, which is why it's fun to do the show. So I thought we'd check in with our old pal cash settled cheese, see if the upside palooza is continuing. And Dan, you'll be happy to know that it is. It was 223 on the show last week, a whopping 233 this week, so up a dime. So forget about everyone's talking NVIDIA and AI, Dan. Clearly the money is in cash settled cheese, sir.
Well, it's a very unique market. And you're right. It is kind of still heading its way up there. We're seeing that in the dairy complex. Not a highly traded market, but over the last couple months, we're actually starting in August. We've been in an uptrend in that market. I would say one thing about our friend Mr. Cheese is that we are getting near levels, including today, that we're starting to see some selling coming into that market. So if you're on the long side, I'd be cautious at the current price levels.
Oh, that sounds like a big adios is coming. Are we giving the big adios to cash settled cheese, sir?
I think it may be getting there, Mark.
I mean, you have a new segment. We call it the big adios with Dan. We got to find out what are you giving. So what if it's not cash settled cheese, what are you giving the big adios to this week, sir?
I think I can tell you a couple. What's interesting are in the currency markets. There we're seeing markets that really are bouncing all over in terms of buys and sells. So I think you need to be sensitive to that. And in fact, the 10-year notes, even though it's been bullish for the last 5-6 days, we're at a level that we've seen sellers before, so I'd be cautious at these levels, but we still have fundamentals that may drive it higher, but that could be a big adios in the 10-year notes and the 30-year bonds.
I think we're onto something there, Mr. Dan. I think the next time you join us, and not immediately because you'll be joining me again in a couple of seconds, but I think the next time you come on, we will have to have a big adios segment just for you. What do you think? You down for that?
I'm down for that. That sounds good.
There. All right. So that music, listeners, means unfortunately we're coming to the end. It's just kind of a sampler today, kind of tell you what's trading, give a little bit of an overview. Don't worry, Dan and I aren't going anywhere. So if you're hanging out in the Pro, which you can check out for yourselves, theoptionsinsider.com/pro, he and I will be back post haste to dive into yet another fun episode. We got some feedback already, which is great. So we're going to go deep into crude oil, maybe a little bit of gold, all sorts of fun coming up on the show. So if you're hanging out in the Pro, that'll be in your ear holes instantaneously. If you're hanging out on the old podcast feed, that'll be coming at you next week in our usual allotted time while I am traveling down in Florida at the Securities Traders Association National Conference. And Mr. Dan, before we go, if folks want to reach out to you and see what you're giving the big adios to, where should they go? What should they do?
Well, they could go to dangramza.com. It's a website that I have a free video that's done daily on 22 different futures markets. I select different ones to take a look at. There's red and green lines which represent buy and sell levels. Again, I'm not making buy and sell recommendations, but you can go back over 10 years and see, okay, what was I saying when this happened? How did those red and green lines move as we saw price move? And then there's a course and also a more advanced video that I do every day. So that if you haven't looked at futures, the place to begin is look at them, follow them, and they'll give you an idea. Are they as crazy as some people think? They may be surprised, I think.
DanGramza.com. And Dan, I do mean it. Next time you join me, I will have that segment. Mark my words, sir. We will have the big adios with Dan Gramza. Folks will tune in just for that, I guarantee you, just to get the big adios. So if you're not checking out DanGramza.com and you're even remotely curious about trading futures, what the heck are you doing, listeners? It's the only game in town. DanGramza.com, the place to go. And of course, you know where to go if you want to kick the tires on actually opening an account for yourselves in these crazy world known as futures. Only one place to go, plus500.com, the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. And again, Kick the tires on their platform. They want to hear from you. They want to hear. That's why they're sponsoring a show like this. That's why they bugged us to get into the futures game, because they want to hear from you folks. So they're kicking off a new platform, kicking off a new market for them. So they want to hear your feedback. Kick the tires. Tell them what you like. Tell them what you'd like to see added. Plus500.com, the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. We have to get on out of here. But Dan and I will be back for the pro folks instantaneously, and for everybody else, we'll be back same bad time, same bad channel next week. Another episode of the Futures Rundown. Stay safe out there, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to the Futures Rundown, proudly sponsored by T4 Futures and Options. Experience the T4 Futures and Options trading platform with its seamless desktop and mobile applications, low latency, and professional functionality tailored for traders and brokers alike. Take advantage of T4 Theoretical Sheets, Strategy Solver, MBO, Advanced Charts, and much more. Empower your trading journey with T4 Futures and Options. Visit ctsfutures.com or search for T4 Futures and Options on Google to register and get a free month. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.